Okay, I think I am live. I'm just gonna double check if I'm live. Hello guys, welcome to the stream. My name is Will. This is C# walkthroughs. Just gonna quickly check that everything is up and running. Looking good so far. We're gonna go through quite a fun, exciting topic today. So just bear with me as I quickly check my handles. If for whatever reason the stream is interrupted by lag or disconnections, I'll be up and running again shortly, or there should be a notification with regards to any announcements. So I'm just off screen right now, just sharing the link on a couple of my handles. My computer is under a fair bit of load, if I'm not mistaken, so I wouldn't be surprised if there's a few issues. Let me just quickly share this stream link, sharing it on my LinkedIn. So if you are connected with me or following me on LinkedIn, you should be able to find the stream link from there if you have to go in and out of the stream for whatever reason. Just quickly having a look around. One more handle, then we're going to get into this exciting topic of XAML and binding. So I'm kind of continuing from the XAML theme. When I say theme, I mean like the topics. The theme of our workshops are being focused around XAML. Just sharing one more link. And then we should dive straight into this. Sweet. Okay. All right, excellent, guys. I think I'm online, and if the levels are bad, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. So if there's anything wrong with the stream or the quality, let me know in the chat, and I can do my best to rectify. All right, my name is Will. As I said, let's get straight into this. Let's not waste any time. I'm just gonna quickly change my view a little bit. Okay, so what I want to do today is to go through how to implement binding with particular focus on UWP, but if you are a WPF developer, that is if you use the WPF front for your .NET projects, primarily in C#, this should be fully interrelatable. Yeah, let's get straight into this. So I have a little bit of an agenda here at the bottom of the screen, and I just noticed that I am blocking the text, so I am going to just adjust that. Where is my mouse? Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, I'll keep it here for now, and I'll make it a little bit smaller. It's a little bit big, actually. I think that's okay. I prefer it on the right, but it's gonna put the text. So anyway, what we're doing today, what I want to do is to look at how to decouple aspects of our logic with the help of binding. What do I mean by that? So the idea behind binding is that we want to achieve this concept of separation of concerns. So what am I talking about when I speak about this? You have, let's say, a monolithic application. Let's just use that as a primary example. A monolithic style application, it does everything within the tin, right? From data access to user interface and all the business logic is all handled by this one code base. Now, the issues that might arise if you say just code everything flat out. Let's use .NET as a example. You know, I start my project, as you see here. I go into my main class. I write all my business logic, such and so forth, and then I go to my XAML. Hopefully I didn't just change anything there. Computer is a little bit slow, so I do apologize for any slowdown. I go to my XAML, build my front, and then I have a working application. Now, that's not wrong, and in fact, it's great, you know? It's a feat in itself to be able to code, and that's I'll even be honest, 98% of my experience coding has been just with this primary focus of making sure things work. you know? But then once you get the hang of things, once you understand what you're doing, you're familiar with, C# and the way certain mechanics work. I believe the next step is to kind of understand how can we make our app scale. So what tends to happen when you're in an industry scenario? Let's give a hypothetical example, still using that monolithic software, theoretically speaking. And let's say you work in a company and you have to deploy this monolithic software. Let's say within the company to be used by the employees. You do so, you write it within your small team, you deploy this app, everything's great. Then the next day, let's say a week, a month, let's just say a month goes by, and you're called up by your boss, and someone made a complaint that maybe they want a piece of functionality to be changed in some way. They found a bug that just wasn't picked up during testing. And let's just say this bug had something to do with the underlying logic of the software. So everything is great on the UI front of things, but what we want to do is make sure that anything we have to do to scale the application, make changes over time with the application, in as much as there is any downtime, we want to attenuate that downtime. And we also want to make sure that we don't break our underlying code base overall. The last thing we'd want to do in an industry scenario is to have a piece of software that works, and because we attempt to scale it, we end up breaking the software at the end of the day. So one thing that can help with this is understanding certain patterns, constructs, and principles that can help make scalability of our apps more viable. And one way I believe you can do this is via separating the concerns, as I said. And one way you can separate the concerns is by implementing data binding. What is data binding? So I have here an MSDN. I still call it MSDN. They seem to have changed it. Microsoft seems to have changed the name to learn.microsoft, but it's all well and good. I'll still refer to this website as MSDN for now, probably. So what is binding? Let's start from the top. So this topic shows, let me just highlight this so you see what I'm doing. Hopefully that's readable. I'll read it out anyway. This topic shows you how to bind a control or other UI elements. So we're going to be focusing again on XAML to a single item, or bind an item's control. So let's say a collection of items within some encompassing control using the Universal Windows Platform application front. So that's what we're using right now, UWP. So basically, as it says here, how to bind a control, a user control to an underlying piece of information or data. That's essentially what we're doing. And I have here an example, which I'm going to run to help kind of demonstrate what is going on here. And I'm just running the software, hoping that it's as smooth sailing as possible. I know system memory was quite low because my computer is under load, but the application has come up now. What I'm going to do is show you guys an example of this application implementing binding. I'm going to explain what that's doing at a very basic level so that it's easy to understand how the concept can be scaled into a wider context. And then we're going to start another project from scratch, and I'm going to code out the implementation of binding from scratch so we can all follow through what's going on. So here I have this very simple UWP front. It's kind of a placeholder. You could even say it might be like some kind of storefront or something like that. I might just change the size a little bit. Let me see if I can just drag that a little bit. Make that a little bit bigger. So this is all just kind of placeholder stuff. As you can see, I press this, takes me to another view. It doesn't do anything like exceptional. It just shows you some information. So let's say, for example, in this fictitious user front, we have a button here. It's like a heart. And if I click it, something pops on the screen as an update. It says number of titles. Don't worry about this prop bit here. It was just something I was using just for my own reference. Click it again. Number 2 comes up. Number 3 comes up. Number 4. So what I'm trying to get at here is that we have some underlying user interface in the realms of this XAML, and this control is actually a text block. And every time we click this button, say we update something to do with the functionality of the software, we are updating our view, which is this control. So I'm just going to cross that out. I'm going to go back into our XAML. Just going to wait for that to catch up. And I'm going to be using this MSDN article as a bit of a reference. So what's actually happening? I'll take you to the text blocks in the XAML. I'm going to just resize this ever so slightly, make it a little bit more readable on the Visual Studio front. I do appreciate it might be hard to read the text of the XAML, so I'm probably going to zoom in a little bit more. So what we have to understand is that over here, I'll just scroll, we have our text block. I've given it a name. There's a little bit of a typo there. That should be a lowercase e, but anyway, featured text block. And you'll see where the text property is, where you'd usually expect to have, say, I don't know, featured titles on the XAML or whatever. There's actually this kind of binding syntax I have here. I've declared x colon bind. And in this case, I've actually specified the binding mode. And all the binding mode is, it just basically means if the user interface experiences some kind of change, then the underlying logic will change. But then if the underlying logic changes, then the user interface changes. See how there's two-way flow there? So you have a flow between the user interface affecting the underlying logic, and you also have the underlying logic that could affect the user interface. You could put this to one way, of course. One-way binding, as the name suggests. So for example, the user interface will only be affected by changes to the underlying logic, but not vice versa. In this case, I just left it as two-way, just because there wasn't any particular reason per se, but it still works either way. And so what you want to do first, and we're going to do this from scratch as well, but I just want to show you guys what's going on right now. Two-way binding. Make sure your update source trigger is property changed. There's a selection of a few properties. There's explicit, default, loss focus, property change, and this kind of refers to the fact that the underlying logic in this case, pertaining to the information being displayed on the text block, is a property value. Okay. I think there's one more here. So path is the path of the underlying information that is bound to our user interface. In this case, we have a directory, I could even say, and this property here of type string called title header. And yeah, I'm going to go through this from scratch. So it just makes it a little bit more easy to understand what's going on, because I could show you all this code and stuff, but I think with all the surrounding distractions of what's going on, it will just kind of be a little bit difficult there. So what I'm going to do, and I'm just hoping everything is smooth sailing. Let's go ahead and cross this out. And as soon as that's gone, I'm going to save this. And then what I'm going to do is just start another Visual Studio session. Okay. So that should be okay. I'll right click there. I'm using Visual Studio 2022, which is quite a good shout, really. Any version of Visual Studio, depending on the front you're using, that supports UWP, I think that's like 2015 up. If that's what the front you're concerned with, should be fine. Otherwise, if it's WPF, you can even roll it back a little bit more. I think even the 2012, 2010, I don't know how far back the WPF front goes, but you can go back quite a bit. So let's go create a new project. I'll just wait for this to load. And we're going to select blank application, universal windows for CSharp. And let's just give it a name. Let's just call it binding demo, something simple. Binding demo. Yes, and I'm going to select my target, my operating system target. We'll wait for that to load. Okay. That's just coming through now. All right. I'll just give that a few more seconds. I'm just off screen gonna prepare basically the files, the CS files that we were looking at, but on off screen, so I can just use as a simple reference if I need to. Let me see, where am I? Library. Ah, yes, main page. Just gonna, that will be off screen, so you won't see any changes, and then we'll hop straight to the XAML. Okay, sweet. Let's get started. So what we want to do here first, I guess we want to kind of have our main UI front. Just wait for that to load. We're going to make a very simple user interface here, just as a proof of concept. It's not going to be like the example I showed you earlier, per se. Right, here we go. So let's suppose, and I do hope that's quite readable. We have a view box. Let's go ahead and expand this. Let me just quickly check. Let me just check my dashboard. Okay, sweet, everything's fine. I'm really hoping the stream is okay, because I'm getting some notifications about the quality of the stream. Just gonna take a second to check it. Yeah, it should be fine. I'm still online. It'll tell me if it crashed. Okay, here we go. So we have a view box. We're gonna quickly set up a very simple user interface. So let's say, let's give it a quick name, why not? Let's name this view box main VB. And then within our view box, and you know what, let's give it some dimensions as well for good measure. 400 by 400. And oops. Let's say this is our application and we have, say, a text block. Don't need to expand this actually, so I'm just gonna collapse that. And let's also give this a name, main TB for text block. And let's say the text right now is empty, okay? Now what we want to do, we could say something like this, hello world. As you can see, it comes up on the screen. I'm gonna zoom in slightly. And this would be fine. We have our app, hypothetically speaking, we have, you know, the logic underlying there. Maybe the logic, maybe this app is meant to just be a billboard that displays, you know, hello world. It's like an advertisement billboard you see when you're on the highway or something. Let's say we want to take this a step further. Let's say we want to say, okay, what if we get a new sponsor for our advertisement billboard? We want to change this. Do we want to basically always have to dig into the underlying XAML just to change this information? And not necessarily. So I'm going to leave that as it is now, but I'm going to start setting up our business logic to help update the hello world text in as much as we need to. So let's just say, for example, just to demonstrate binding, if I go back here, let's actually, in our view box, have a stack panel, just so I can have some multiple controls in my view box. And let's suppose we have a button. And this button, let's just give this button a name. Main button. Oops, spelled that wrong. Height, let's say something like, I was going to say 40. Nah, that's just too much. 10. And let's say a width of, was it 400? Looks a bit strange. I'm just going to drag that out if I can. And let's make that 80. And what I'll do next is to give the button a content, just so it's easy for us to read. Let's just say, I don't know, update button. No, update text. That makes more sense. All right. Change the foreground. Let's make it white. Background. I don't really like that gray color. Let's make it light gray. Okay. And let's just change the text. Text size, quite large though, isn't it? Something like this. Very simple stuff. Okay, so earlier I spoke about this concept of separation of concerns. And what binding allows us to do, it gives us, it presents an underlying framework that helps data access without the need of, or should I say, whilst reducing coupling between your user interface logic and your business logic. And one way you can also help to streamline this, as I've said in my notes somewhere, or at least in the description, I'm not sure if I wrote it down in my notes, but that's actually looking at the MVVM design pattern, which actually goes quite hand in hand with binding. And we're gonna borrow from MVVM. We're gonna introduce binding in our syntax, and we're gonna see how, in this very simplistic example, how that all helps to make efficient code that's rather scalable. So what I wanna do, I'm just gonna quickly set something off screen. Just bear with me. Let's go back to our main page. Gonna make sure that that's readable. It's fairly readable. And what we're gonna do, we're gonna have a property, or rather, we're gonna assume that our business logic is handled by a class. So we don't want to pertain all our business logic, say, in our main page. I don't know if I have a tab here on MVVM, but I will gloss over that in a hot minute. It stands for model view model. I'm just gonna go here. And the idea is that we separate the concerns of our underlying code base as models, which usually contains all the business logic, views, which usually pertains to the user interface layer, and the view model is kind of the bridge in between. I'm not going to strictly go too vertical into MVVM, nor am I going to borrow fully from the concepts of MVVM, but I'm going to take some of the ideas and use it for this. So I quite like the idea of separating the concerns of our UI and business logic. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create this folder, i.e. a namespace. I'm going to go ahead and call it models. And then I'm going to add a class in models. Excuse me. And this class, let's see, what can we call it? Doesn't really matter. We can say something like text. No, let's say update class. Very creative. Update class. Let's wait for that to load. And see if I can draw that out a little bit. So as you can see here, hopefully it's not too hard to see. On my Solution Explorer, under this models namespace, I have this update class, update class. And I want to, let's just say as an example, I want to put the underlying business logic in here. Okay. So I'm just going to quickly go and refer to this one more time. I'm just off screen right now, trying to change my tabs here, just so I can smoothly write this all out. Just bear with me 1 minute, guys. Okay, that's fine. So once again, this is only borrowing from the concepts. It won't be 100% one-to-one efficient. It's just a simple example to explain binding. So there's other ways to do this. This is the way I'm going to show you guys right now. So I'm going to go ahead in this class. Let's go ahead and give it a constructor at first. We're going to give this a constructor. I'm going to create a field. So usually I tend to like to make my fields private. So private string, let's say billboard, using the idea of like a advertisement billboard, say on a highway, billboard text. We're going to declare that there. And what we're going to do, we're going to have a public property to expose this billboard declaration, this billboard member. So we're going to go ahead, say public string. Note how the field is private, but the accessing property we're about to create is actually public. Okay. And we're going to, as a little bit of a naming convention rule of thumb, it's the respective property I'm creating here is going to have the same name but an uppercase, which is kind of an optional naming convention there. Going to give this a getter. And you know what? I don't feel like I have to expand that per se. Oops. Sorry about that, guys. And I did something that I mistyped. Stuff is coming on the screen. I don't know what that is. Semantic classification. Let's cross out that banner. Sorry about that. Okay, so we have our generic kind of getter setter. I'm just going to refer quickly to off screen. So just make sure I'm following this through, okay. Change my mind. I'm going to expand this. So what I'll do, this will return our billboard. And we're just gonna set the value of the property as such. Okay. Okay, so we have this here, and now what we want to do is say, okay, every time we click this update text, we want to update what this hello world says. Okay. And then we're going to create the binding path to the underlying property being changed. So first I will just create the click event just to kind of set things up as such. And I'm just checking my notes off screen to just make sure I'm coherent here. Okay, excellent. Now, what I want to do here I want to suggest that we have a property. And this property is going to pertain to our models namespace and our class called update class. Just going to quickly make sure I'm up to scratch here. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So I'm going to have a public property, and we're going to reference this models namespace, as you can see, and we have our update class. And we're going to give this declaration, this class a name, declaration for our property. So let's say models ref. It's a reference to our namespace. And we're going to just give it a getter and a setter. Okay, now this is quite good actually. So what sometimes happens is that you get this inconsistency thing. So basically, I'll read it out. So inconsistent accessibility. Property type update class is less accessible than property main page models ref. Hopefully I did that right. Yeah, that's correct. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the underlying models. I'm suspecting because this is a public property, it might be having a little bit of a clash with the accessibility level of our class. I'm not too sure. And I'm looking at this. It's an internal class. I'm going to just change that to public. See what happens. I think I've hopefully dealt with that error. So that's one thing you want to kind of be aware of when dealing with this is that when you're referencing your classes, especially when you're dealing with a public property, you don't want the referenced class to be less accessible than the property itself. So what I did, in this case, the workaround was to make the referenced class public, rather than internal as it was in default, by default rather. Okay, so we have our models reference. I'm just going to skim through so I can see what I'm doing here. Off screen. And what we want to do next, this is going to be tied to the binding. It gets a tiny bit involved. We actually want to introduce an event. So our event, we're going to get this delegate type, if I can find it, property change event handler, and we're going to call it property change. So just bear with me as this all comes together. I'm going to explain it from a higher level. So we've gone ahead and we've created this property change event handler delegate. And the idea here is that when we have, we're going to have an actual event being raised, and we're going to hook that event to the changing property itself. So over here I have my function. So I'm going to just leave it here above that function. I'm going to say public void on property changed. All right, and let's see this. I think I'm missing a namespace actually. I think I need, oh, I've got the system component model. Good. We're gonna get this caller member name. I would call this an attribute if I'm not mistaken. Since we're dealing with string, we're gonna pass string for the parameter. Let's just say property name, and we're gonna have a default value of null. Excuse me. All right, sweet. And what we want to do here is say our property changed event handler. Let's make it nullable, and we're going to call invoke method, and we're going to essentially pass a reference to the class itself, the main page, and an instance of property change event args. And we're going to pass something into this constructor, which will be the property name as a string, which we already have up there. If I can spell correctly. Property name, is it? I actually spelled that wrong. It's a bit of a typo. I think I spelled that completely wrong. Property name. Yeah, let me just copy and paste it. Let's just review the error. Cannot convert system component model property changing event args to system component model property changed. So I basically referenced the wrong member, so I'm going to change that to changed, and that should eliminate the error right there. Okay, so I'm going to just catch up with my notes so I know what I'm doing, so I can do this hopefully correct the first time round. Let me see. Just gonna go to another file. Okay, so now the idea is every time we change a property, what we're gonna do is actually call this functionality, okay? And so if we kind of think about what's going on here with our XAML, this hello world is essentially the billboard information we want to change. So I'm just going to go here. And I have here this model reference member, which is basically a declaration of our update class. So one way I would suggest that we can deal with this, so just find my original file off screen. I'm sorry for this, I'm slightly sluggish right now as I'm kind of flipping to between two screens. I'm going to go to my XAML. I'm going to go to the button in question, or sorry, rather the text block. And now I want to implement the binding, the syntax element of the binding in the XAML realm. So what I'm going to do is say, instead of this hello world text, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to say curly brace. We're going to call this x:bind. I'm going to specify the path. And now the drop down gives me a few options here. I think it's the namespace we want is model, or rather models ref. So if you remember, I made a declaration of the models of the update class within the models namespace. So we're going to get the models ref. We're going to get billboard text. Okay. So we've created a path to the underlying text information that we want to update on this control. Okay. And let's do one or two more things here. So I'm going to put a colon. I'm sorry, not colon, comma. I'm gonna specify the binding mode. Let's make it two-way just to be on the safe side. Okay. So we have two-way binding set up, and we have our path. So let's go ahead and look at this. I don't know if this is going to work, so I'm going to just F12 this. Sure enough, it's taken me to my CS class, which is great. Billboard text. All right, let me just quickly have a look at what's going on. Make sure I'm doing this correctly. So just bear with me, guys. I did forget something actually, I think. Not too sure if I need to declare to implement an interface. Okay, I might have done something slightly off here. So let's just cover all our bases. What I showed you guys earlier I'm just thinking to myself now, because I've made a path, if I go back to the XAML, I've made a path to this billboard text, which is in the models ref billboard text. So if I just go here, models ref is a declaration of the update class. What I want to do instead, I want to actually implement, but first I'm going to need the right namespace, which will help a lot. System.componentModel, which should hopefully give us access to the iNotify property change interface. Now we're going to be met with an error because we have to implement our interface. So I'm going to go ahead, go to Quick Actions and Refactoring, Implement Interface. Excellent. So we have our implemented interface here, and we have exposed a member called property changed. Okay, let me just grab that. And let me just see where I'm at. So now that if we consider the fact that this billboard text is going to be the target member that is going to be updating, every time it updates, in other words, we call this setter functionality. I want to set up the binding around here. So I'm going to say this, and let's just say on property changed for now. And we have to go ahead and create this functionality. Oops. Okay. So let's go ahead and create our onProperty changed, just as I showed you earlier. Just kind of rejigging it a little bit to hopefully make it work properly. And I'll trim at the ends just so everything is easy to understand. And again, let's have this caller name, caller member name, attribute, string, property name. And then we're going to say property changed, make it nullable, call invoke. We're going to pass this, and we're going to construct a new property changed event args, I think. Yep. And we're going to pass our parameter as such. And let's see what's going on here. I'll start here, caller member name. Okay. Let's set this to null. And that should hopefully help us there. Okay, so I have set up this onProperty changed event or function, which is being called every time we update billboard text. Just making sure everything's consistent here. Right, so now what we want to do is actually have a functionality that occurs when we hit the button, and that we want to be able to change the text to something, right? So let's go back to our main page. I have here the button click, and there's the variety of ways we can do this. So let's see, for the sake of simplicity, let me see. I'm thinking just gonna hard code what the value would be. Let's have here private string billboard, just to illustrate this very simply. Let's say up updated text. Let's say, for example, the billboard has to say one ad, one phrase during the day, and it updates to another phrase at night. So we're going to have this billboard updated text declaration in our, essentially our model, you know, this namespace containing a class with all our kind of business logic, as it were. Just for the sake of speed, I'm going to copy this. But I'm going to change it. So then we're going to create a respective property. Oops, you know what? No. Hopefully that went through. We're going to just change the naming convention. And really, this doesn't have to be changed. It's gonna be, I'm gonna make this read only actually. And then I will give it a value. So let's just say, for example, this billboard updated text is equal to, so we had hello world. Let's just say good evening. Well, I know I deleted that at the beginning, so I'll just change things as it needs to be. So let's say we want to have an updated text, good evening world, but then by default, and then for the sake of example, let's just put this in the main page. Let's go back here. No, you know what? Makes more sense to put it here. Billboard text is equal to good morning world. So let's just run through things. Have a billboard here. When we construct the main page, we want to also construct our model. So what I'll do is construct the class in a hot second. Just want to make sure I'm consistent with my notes. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So what we'll do, we'll say this, just so we don't have any initialization errors at runtime. Models ref equals new update class. So we're just instantiating this member here. Property change, main button clicked, and then when, oh yes, I nearly forgot about this. So when we click the button, we're going to call our models ref property, which gives us access. Let me see what's here. Okay, excellent. Gives us access to our update class. And what we want is a functionality that updates this billboard. I spelled that wrong. So let's have a function here. But let's put it underneath our property just to keep things quite neat. We'll make this a public void update to evening text. And what we're gonna do is just basically say, okay, we're gonna call this functionality. So billboard text. So billboard text, we're gonna change the value. Oops. Billboard updated text. Let's see this here. So what am I doing here? I'm changing the underlying logic. Underlying text, billboard text is updated to the updated billboard text, which I've given it a value of good evening world. But then with the, and I've got an error somewhere. Let me just quickly check what that is. Line 48. Oh, yes, here I was. So I'm going to then call that functionality, update to evening text for our billboard. And then because of the binding that we have set up earlier, if everything is correct, so we're going to go back to the XAML. Oh, goodness. Let me change that. I think it's a little better like this. And I get more space because I need the scroll bar to be visible. So because of our binding path that we've set up, models ref, if you remember, we instantiated that in the main page. Billboard text, which is our property. If I just quickly jump to the definition. Billboard text is this property. There's a getter here and there's a setter with our onProperty chain hooked up. So I don't think I've forgotten anything. So I will run a test and we'll see if this works. So this is going to be the moment of truth. Let's see what happens. I'm going to quickly check my dashboard while that loads. Okay, so it won't take too long now. I know my computer's a little bit on the sluggish side. So right now, just loading, just deploying the application. Let's have a look at the notes. So we've already added our text block. I like to kind of cross things out as we go. Okay, so here's something that's quite interesting. We are borrowing from this MVVM concept in order to, again, as I said, make our code more scalable in the long run. You might have noticed I didn't implement a view model. Now, this is obviously where things get a bit subjective. You could argue that if you're going to implement the MVVM model, you have to do it one-to-one. You may also argue that it is a framework and thus should be treated as such. Depending on the needs of your application, you may find that you don't need to separate every concern between every single member user interface component. You know, there might have to be a little bit of a balance, and because this is a really simplistic example, as you can see here, Good Morning World is our billboard at the morning. We don't need to worry with too much of the complexities that come with a larger code base. We're kind of trying to create something really simple. So I'm hoping I did this right. Let's just see what happens if I click this button. Thankfully, it says Good Evening World. So what I've just demonstrated here is that this text block, if I can just put this somewhere. Okay. I implemented binding on the text property of this text block. I didn't write it in XAML. If we go back, where am I? So for the text property of our main text block, I didn't write Good Evening World. I wrote a path to a property, an underlying piece of data, a member of our models namespace, which contains the update class. Sorry about that, I named it kind of strange, called billboard text. I'll home in on that again. Billboard text was set up and instantiated to initially have a value of Good Morning World, as you saw. And it also had this onProperty changed functionality, which, mind you do have to implement the iNotify property change. So I did show you some stuff earlier in this workshop, which was actually not used at all. I was going through the main page trying to set up the onProperty change stuff, but then it occurred to me that it makes sense if this is actually in our update class. So I do apologize for that. Anyway, so what we did, we have a main button that when clicked calls our models reference namespace, accesses the update to evening text function, which just simply does an assignment of the billboard text to update it from the morning text to the evening text, as I've kind of said here. And yeah, so that's basically the idea of separating the concerns. And what are the concerns here? The concerns was having the overarching, or should I say, the underlying business logic being this: good evening world, good morning world, but separating that from any kind of scope of XAML itself, which encompasses the user interface layer. So we didn't have to hard code it basically. Again, it's a very simplistic example, but I hope you may have come to a little bit more of an understanding as to why we might want to do this. So I'm going to just scroll down on my notes. I didn't quite declare a view model. We went straight to the model. I just thought that would be more sensible. Just checking this. We implemented xbind, so I'm going to go there. And let me just quickly check my notes. Key things to note: accessibility conflicts. So we did have an issue whereby the target class was internal in terms of its scope visibility, whereas we had a public property, and the C# didn't like that. It didn't like that a public property is trying to expose an internal or some kind of protected, member of a class. We had to make sure it was consistent there. We also had to make sure the on-property change mechanic is set. And this is the thing I want to bring to your attention, guys. So I went through, and this is more like an observation kind of thing. I went through this MSDN article. And make sure it's the right one. And it's a really good article. In fact, I would really encourage you guys, and I put myself here as well, instead of relying on like random forums, which I did rely on random forums, I relied on a forum when I got stuck before the stream, but I do my best to try and look at official documentation, read the examples and the remarks and kind of figure out what's going on if I'm stuck. And this example is good because it even simplifies further what I showed you guys today. You have the xbind here, view model, the path and stuff like that. But I'm just double checking the C# logic here. But I noticed that it didn't really go into details regarding the iNotify changes, unless I haven't seen it yet. So, do you remember when I did this? Let me see if I can get it up again. Visual Studio, might as well full screen it. If we go to the update class, which is the underlying business logic, we had to basically implement this iNotify property changed interface, which exposes a member property changed, which then allows us to correctly create this function. Where's it gone? On property change, which we could then place in our property that we want to update via binding. The article didn't really go into detail regarding that. If I can find the tab. And when I was preparing for this stream beforehand and I was going through the notes, the MSDN and stuff, I was like, the binding's not working. Thankfully, I referred to an older piece of code that I wrote, which had a way of doing this. But I thought it might be worth noting. Maybe there's something I missed out. If there is, do let me know, guys. I couldn't get this one-to-one example to work per se, but then when I introduced the iNotify, the iNotified interface, it literally just worked. Like I had to kind of rejig a few things and it just worked. I was like, yeah, that's quite cool. So let's go back to my agenda, or our agenda, should I say. And we've kind of reached the end of things. I'm going to wrap it up soon, keep this within an hour, I guess. I would like to kind of wrap up with this. It's best to keep the MVVM architecture fairly simple. Again, why even bother with this? So basically, again, if you ever have found yourself in a scenario where you're building an app, you're using WPF, you're using UWP, whatever the front end, whatever the back end, and the larger you have to make the scope of your application, you find it's harder to maintain the code base. But if we adhere to proven standards, proven patterns and principles that are there as sort of kind of like a funnel, to keep things going in a certain direction, we find we encounter less issues with our code base because we have a provable system that says, okay, if if XYZ occurs and we want ABC, we can do 1, 2, 3 to get ABC. So basically, because the MVVM model is fairly proven, we know as long as we adhere to this principle or these concepts, we won't get issues that we can't solve in our code. So again, it's best to keep the MVVM architecture fairly simple. That's my own anecdote, because I didn't implement a view model namespace. I only had a model, and the view was effectively the main page. I don't want to overcomplicate such a simple example. And yeah, guys, I'm gonna just quickly get up a tab off screen. I'm gonna just round up. Gonna quickly close the stream, but I want to just introduce you guys to what's gonna happen next time I'm online. In either the next or the next stream after the next stream. And I want to look at using techniques such as implementing interfaces. So I touched on interfaces today and implementing interface expose functionality to extend the functionality of an application. And this kind of ties in with the open-closed principle, which is the O in the solid principles. So you have solid, and I don't know if I can do this, if I can say them all off by heart, but when you have this design, a set of design principles that say, let me write it out as well, it will make it easier to explain. So you have this SOLID concept. When you're writing your applications, you want to make sure that you're adhering to single responsibility. I'm hoping I get this right. If I get it wrong, shout me out in the chat. Open, closed. I have forgotten how to say this. I think it's Liskov something. I'll say Liskov's principle. Please correct me, guys, if I'm wrong. I'm gonna literally search it because I've forgotten from there, but I don't want to leave you guys hanging. I've literally forgotten. Solid principles. Let's go. Single responsibility, open, close, Liskov. That was it. Liskov substitution, interface segregation principle, and dependency inversion. Don't want to spread misinformation. So anyway, all that good stuff. And what I want to do is double down on this next time. Open, closed. And I'll probably be touching a little bit on single responsibility because it kind of suggests the separation of concerns, single responsibility. But with this open, closed, what we're essentially saying is that we want an application to be open to extension, if I'm phrasing that right, but closed to modification. And you might be thinking to yourself, what is the difference between the two? There is a difference, which I'm going to be going through in the next workshop. But essentially, I want to also explore what techniques we can use, such as interfaces, to basically introduce extending a functionality without necessarily modifying the initial code base itself. There's a way you can do that, and it's very exciting. Guys, we've reached the end of the stream. Thanks if you've tuned in. My name is Will from CSharp Walkthroughs. Follow me on LinkedIn. My handle will be in the description. Any necessary links and references will also be on the description of the archive link of the stream. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. God bless. Bye-bye. See you next time. It is.